But they're also driving disruption in the value chain. So the way markets function from an enterprise point of view is changing. And the shorthand way to describe that is you now see the emergence of adjacency strategies. And I know adjacency is not a common word for people that don't speak English. So adjacency would be something like this. If somebody was standing next to me, they would be adjacent to me. And what you see a lot of companies now doing is they have to go into adjacent markets. If you look at Google, Google is now in advertising as well as mobile phones. Apple, of course, went into mobile music apps as well, also into advertising. Amazon announced yesterday they were moving into advertising. So every market is becoming more competitive because no company can achieve these extraordinary growth requirements in the markets that they currently own. So I think there are really profound changes going on that are going to work their way out, and this opportunity to get innovation to market through this system is going to be a lot more difficult than it has been, if it was ever easy. I just put in a global VC community because the idea you still get in policy circles is that if only the European venture capital market worked more effectively, we'd get more startups, more high growth companies, and that would save us. But I think the fact now is that the Chinese and Indian venture capital communities are very powerful as well. A number of more cultural things, mobility and portability, and the social dynamics that go with that. And the kind of impact, I don't think we understand it. If I was in a research institute, I might be thinking that's one of the most significant problems we need to address. How do we understand the impact of people communicating globally into these emerging markets and advanced markets and creating new business through very weak links? Businesses traditionally operated through strong links, personal networks. And now it's accelerating through people communicating all the time. And if you go back to classical economics, it would say, look, every time you increase the speed of communications, you accelerate economic development. And we've now made instant communications. We've created real-time instant communications. But we really, really don't understand that dynamic. I want to mention frontier markets as well, because I think what a lot of Western companies have now realized is the innovations they need are not going to come out of this market. They're going to come through interacting with the Indian market, the African market. Africa is a very dynamic innovation environment right now. A good example would be GE's portable electrocardiogram. It's become a fairly familiar case study, but essentially what GE's done is created an electrocardiogram by working with rural India, so doctors and patients in rural India. The electrocardiogram they've created has a mobile phone. It transmits data from people's heart rates back to a data center. So a fairly advanced form of remote monitoring of health. But what I find most interesting is it's rumored to cost 1/6 of an electrocardiogram that you will use in an American hospital. So now these Western companies are realizing it's not just about Tata and Geely. They can go over and they can create substantial cost reductions. The only surprise, and why is it a surprise? Why isn't that electrocardiogram in our markets? I think we're at this kind of watershed where as soon as those come in, as soon as you start to get this kind of thing into our markets, look 3 years ahead, 4 years ahead, 5 years ahead, it releases substantial amounts of household income. It releases money in the health system, but it's going to crucify Western companies. So, that's why we're not in a rush to do it. Some good lessons to be learned from policy there. The right policy right now is get these products in, liberate households to spend again. So I think there's also a rise of smart people everywhere. A couple of years ago, people were saying, look, there's the creative city, the creative class. We're going to get through this because we're smart, we're creative, we do new things. But I think we now see that's nonsense. Smart people are everywhere. An education system, a third level, fourth level education system is no competitive advantage whatsoever. And finally, I'll leave out the bottom one. I think there is, no, not finally, I won't leave it out. I think there is a change in attitude towards ownership, and I'll come on to that in a second. But I think that the most potent development is the consumerization of innovation, an increasingly powerful and important role for consumers, and an increasing recognition that consumers, individuals, are themselves very smart, very innovative, and a very potent force. So as you get this kind of decline in oligopoly power, the decline in lab-based innovation, you've got the rise of something from the grassroots. Actually, the way I'm going to run this, I wanted to stop every 10 minutes, so more or less after every pull-up, and just say, does anybody, well, we want to debate, we want to discuss, so does anybody recognise these problems from the Swedish context? Would there be, is there a big fear from low-cost markets in the Swedish market, in most Swedish industry? One or two people are nodding their heads. Actually, I talked to somebody earlier who said, no, we're isolated, we always have been. It's not a threat to Sweden. So maybe it is a threat to Sweden. What about personal innovation? Because I want to go on and talk about it. And I find myself trying to do new things all the time. You know, it might be because of the work I do, but I don't think so. I meet a lot of people who are just making little adjustments to their lifestyle. Like, I have a really absurd adjustment to mine. I spend most winters carrying seaweed from the beach onto my garden. I just do it relentlessly. It's really stupid. But it feels like I'm contributing something back. It just means my square patch of earth is a little bit more fertile. I've replaced some minerals. Anybody venturing into new lifestyle components? Not anybody in Sweden is doing anything new? No? I guess a few people are. Yeah, okay, so let's talk about that. I'm going to keep it an abstract level just very briefly, because I have a feeling that just like we see really fundamental change going on here, you know, the erosion of power centres that have dominated Western economies for 50 years, I think that a set of ideas that's dominated our way of thinking for 50, maybe longer actually, 50 years or more, is also in decline. And I think that idea is the idea of progress. We bought into it as, it's almost the symbol of Western society, really, that we believe that science and technology is always going to drive things forward. Whatever blips we have, like world wars and genocide, obliteration of whole races, actually science and technology is going to take us on this journey to better and better things and some kind of completion as humans. And you see it in American technology even now with the singularity ideas, that their technology is actually going to make superior humans for Americans to compete in Africa, presumably. And I think what's replacing that is we are getting a much more profound sense that actually nature offers a better metaphor for our lives and our relationships with institutions like government and industry. And what I mean by that is the growing awareness of how habitats function is allowing people to view society as a cyclical kind of a phenomenon. So people are prepared now to think, actually my company is going to go down. I don't think that science is always going to be for the good. I don't think that technology is always progress. And actually governments, institutions like the firm rise and fall. And our ability to see our society in failure mode and collapse mode, I think is very, very new. But I think it's a very mature view, and if you look back at history, you probably would have adopted that view earlier.